All right, everyone, we'll just go ahead and get started. Welcome, and thank you for joining today for our webinar, What is Immature Configuration Management Costing Organization? My name is Alexander Mazurek, and I'm with Quint Wellington Redwood. I'll be your host during this session. At this time, I would like to point out the questions panel that appears on the side of your GoToWebinar screen. During this session, feel free to ask a question at any point, and we will have a designated portion following this presentation in which I will read your questions aloud for Drew, and he'll be able to answer for everybody. So go ahead and ask a question at any time. So we just want to introduce the objectives of today's webinar, and this is what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be describing a breakdown in configuration management practices that is common. We'll inform you about the resulting direct monetary costs of such breakdowns. We'll also inform you about the resulting loss opportunities by using DevOps as an example, and provide suggestions for addressing this breakdown. And at the end, of course, we will answer your questions. So I just want to introduce our organization. We're Quint Wellington Redwood. We are a 100% independent management consulting firm. We've been in business for over 20 years now, established in 1992 in Amsterdam. Today we are completely global with over 250 consultants, and we operate on just about every single continent there is in 49 countries. And our core business practices include sourcing, architecture, governance, lean IT, and service management. For the last few years, we've been listed as a top global advisor on sourcing and governance, and we are a continued recognized thought leader in the areas of service management and the emerging area of lean IT. So I'd just like to give a brief introduction to Drew. He is a principal consultant with us. He has over 30 years experience here in the areas of configuration management. He works with ITSM, and he has been a speaker at conferences around the world with organizations such as ITSMF. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand the reins over to Drew and for the presentation. Here you go, Drew.
Thank you, Alexander. I hope everyone is having a good day. It's my pleasure to speak to you today and share some knowledge on how to get the most out of your configuration management efforts. So let's get right down to it. What does immature configuration management cost your organization? I'd like to start by building a common frame of reference for the purposes of this webinar. So I want to spend just one slide, 1 minute, reviewing the goals and objectives of configuration management as stated in the Agile best practices. Everyone who reads these bullets is going to come away with a slightly different interpretation of them based on their background and experience. So let's consider this first bullet point. Support the business and customers' objectives and requirements. Now, most people wouldn't give this sentence a second thought. I mean, after all, every person does, IT person does, in some way, everything they do is in support of requirements for the business or your customers. So you just kind of breeze over that particular sentence. And I find this sentence typical of the ITIL books. It's technically correct, but it lacks contextual definition. What are customer control objectives and requirements in terms of configuration management? What does that mean to you? When I look at that sentence, I can apply over 30 years of configuration management background. I mean, my first job in this space was in 1984. Not to give away my age or anything, but so after that many years in this field, I bring more to the table when I look at control objectives and requirements. So let's take a look at the third bullet here. Minimize the number of quality and compliance issues caused by improper configuration of services and assets. The phrase improper configuration calls itself to my attention. And again, depending on who you ask, you're going to get different interpretations of this sentence. Some are going to say, well, it's referring to the operating system or software settings and options that should be enabled or disabled. So, for example, on an operating system is secure file transfer, the FTP, the file transfer protocol turned off, and secure FTP turned on. Or is this a configuration setting so that your monitoring equipment goes out and looks at a server every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or some other specified interval of time? Those kinds of settings would constitute a configuration. Others are going to say that that sentence is talking about that servers and other infrastructure devices, storage arrays and the like, are configured to talk to each other correctly. So did your discovery tools go out and find the relationships between the devices that you were expecting? And still others may think about this as are your services providing the value that is expected by your customers? For me, when I look at this sentence, this third sentence, I take all those meanings and more. And again, this is an example of when we look at configuration management in the ITIL books. It's technically accurate, but a little bit of lacking contextual description. So one last thing here. Let's look at the second bullet for a quick moment. Paraphrasing, it says configuration management should provide configuration information to enable decisions. So everyone struggles with what information does this encompass. You end up with either too much information and then configuration management collapses under its own weight of the overhead, or there's too little and there's no value add. Well, configuration management's been around for 50 years, more than 50 years, and it's widespread in a lot of other industries outside of IT. And to me, it's helpful if we kind of think back through those examples of how it's done in other industries so that we can make sure that what we're doing from an IT perspective is the proper thing. So let's talk about, in other places, and generally, configuration management is an engineering discipline to control the creation and functionality of products. So what are the products for IT? Well, that's the services and applications that we provide our business and customers. So in this particular sense, what a configuration is what a product is physically and functionally expected to be. Okay? 3 takeaways from this slide. Your business and customers have control objectives and requirements for the services and IT applications that you provide. Configuration management is the discipline to ensure the services and application align to those objectives and requirements, i.e. they're physically and functionally what they're expected to be. And information about the configuration of services and applications must be readily available to support timely and effective decision making. So that's the common frame of reference for us. So let's declare a breakdown. The purpose of configuration management is to ensure that the release documentation controls the physical and functional configuration of products. In other words, they match what's expected. Unclear product, which i.e. application and IT services, unclear product configurations are having a widespread negative impact to your organization. Do you think this is the case in your organization? So let's think about, I asked all of you to think about the 5 most critical applications or services for your business or customers. Revenue generating, critical back office support, whatever it might be, whatever your business might be. So think about those 5 applications or services and ask yourself, is there a definitive set of documentation that defines all of the business and customers' control objectives and requirements for any of those products? A complete set. But when was the last major change implemented for those top 5? What are the requirements documented in the change or the project or the service request, whatever was driving the change? Did the change describe an entire set of control objectives and requirements, or only the ones that were changing? So the gap here is that you don't have a complete set, a complete understanding of your configurations and as compared to the requirements and control objectives, which gets you to they're not well documented. There's no way to verify the release of the changes that go back into the before it's made in the live environment, and the configuration information is not available or worse yet, it might be missing or unclear. So let's think about let's get down to real dollars and cents here. What does this cost you if you don't have this complete set of documentation of control objectives and requirements? Well, the Institute of Configuration Management, which has been around for many, many years, has published research based on about 30 years of collecting data that most organizations spend at least 40% of their efforts on corrective action. So if you think about this, you meet your coworkers in your IT department and the folks you interact with in the business spend most of their collective time discovering and defining control objectives and requirements again and again, correcting operational issues when product configurations and services are not what they're expected to be, or when unclear or incorrect decision support information is used as a basis for decisions. People are using the wrong data, can't find the data, they have to keep looking, right? So the obvious waste and rework and intervention efforts are just the tip of the iceberg. Ask yourself again, what are the, what about your top 5? Any of this sound familiar? You're behind your schedule on delivery to your customers. You're over your budget. You have less functionality than what was originally desired. Marginal quality of services and applications, and they're susceptible to unplanned disruptions. Does this sound familiar? This is all symptoms of not having clear, concise product configurations. So data drives IT workflows, right? Whether it be a request process, a requirements gathering process, designs, updating, the testing processes, work instructions, a change request, any supporting documentation. There's a whole series. Everything in IT pretty much has a workflow that goes with it. And as these workflows proceed, every step quality is critical. So for example, if you have 5 steps in a process, and everybody in those 5 steps does 99% accurate work, at the end of the day, coming out, your effort is only about 95% of quality. You spread that over 10, it drops to 90%. So it's an exponential, super exponential growth rate. So data quality is paramount. So if you think about this, how much corrective action will result if over that workflow? How long will this poor quality data persist? And what does it cost you from a culture of untrusted data? This is nothing new. This has been an issue for ITs for 50 years now. Give me an example. Right out of the ITIL books, here is an example of the configuration levels and baseline points from the development process. So this is down the left-hand side. It's about defining a service, defining its requirements, its solution, and then up the right-hand side is building it and releasing it, right? I have a copy of a U.S. government-issued software standard from the mid-'80s that has this exact picture in it. I mean, 30 plus years ago, this is still the same issue. This diagram is trying to articulate that there are best practices for taking baselines of the documentation as it's produced down the left-hand side and making sure that what's built and tested and released to the customer matches that documentation. How many people, how many organizations actually implement this account or implement this practice, right? This ties also to the concept of lean IT. There are 2 customers. At the end of the day, there's the business customers or the end customer, and then there's the next in line customer. So it's clear that some of this information is not intended for the end customer. It's intended for the next in line customer. requirements are handed off to an architect who does the design. Right? The design is intended for the developers and the testers. It's not intended for the end user. So all of this comes back to good software software development practices, good configuration management practices. Not having the steps built into your process is costing your organization. So let's talk about the cost of sales. This is the easiest way to clearly articulate the magnitude and cost of this breakdown. The cost of net income for a company is based on net sales minus the cost of sales, right? Your cost of sales is a combination of effective resources and corrective action resources. If you can reduce the cost of sales by 40%, look what you would do to net income. And this is real big money, right? And I think this is a breakdown of people, process, and tools straight across the way, across the board, and it's a configuration management failure. Okay, so when I look at people, and I'm not talking about Bob, Fred, Linda, or somebody else on your configuration management team that is to blame for this. I'm referring to is that most organizations only have the staff to perform a limited number of configuration management activities. There's an industry shortage of people with experience and affordable and qualified resources. So, most organizations don't undertake additional configuration management activities because it's hard to find people that can do this. Let's skip down to, let's talk about tools for a second. I recently read a Gartner study that reviewed all the configuration management capabilities of all the major commercially available ITSM tool sets. And all of them, all these tools, basically only support 5 use cases. That of the IT asset manager, somebody performing support roles from an infrastructure standpoint, the CMDB manager, a change manager, and subject matter experts, security, architects, people like that. Those are the 5 use cases. So generally speaking, the tool breakdown here is that there isn't out-of-the-box functionality for doing what we're talking about here, how to correct this gap, this breakdown. So I put process here last because I think it's really the result of the other 2 factors. There aren't processes because there aren't people and tool sets to do this. So in most organizations as well, the breakdown, people realize that their actual value they're getting from configuration management efforts is well below their original expectations. Again, the reason is they haven't taken it far enough. They're doing the 5 basic use cases, but that isn't where the significant savings come in. So every time I've ever done a IT service management proposal, always had to include, real dollars, hard dollars, and soft dollars, which are a little harder to measure. I mean, real money like labor is easy to calculate, software costs easy to calculate, but some of the soft dollars, what is the cost to your organization if a website for a new product launch is 4 weeks late? You haven't been selling a product for 4 weeks. How much did that cost you? What if somebody, one of your competitors, jumped out into the marketplace ahead of you? How much does it cost you with your customers think you're not necessarily the market leader? Things you can't put a dollar sign on. One of these things also that is included is lost opportunity costs. Every time you talk about lost opportunities, every year most businesses have a whole list, a laundry list of things they want to do, and they have to pare it down. And all of them, may have a good solid business case, but you can't do all of them. So you have to pick and choose and prioritize. Right? The ones that you don't do are lost opportunities. So as an example for this lost opportunity cost, I want to use DevOps. which is one of the newer and more popular management approaches. So DevOps is a software development methodology that really stresses communication, collaboration, and integration between the software developers and the IT operations folks. So they want to put these people together as really are responsible for purpose, right? Everything is built together, and you're going to get some of the four goals. They're looking for quality and value and speed and efficiency. And remember the symptoms we talked about earlier. That this is exactly the problem that most organizations face, and historically IT has faced. So DevOps helps organizations break down the walls between IT and the business areas. In theory, this should help address the breakdown we're discussing today. But having gathered all the people who have institutional knowledge of the physical and functional requirements and expectations into a single team should help improve service delivery. However, if your same configuration management practices are implemented, you're not going to get quite the value out of it you thought you were. Having the DevOps teams does not automatically ensure the delivered product ensures the physical and functional configurations your business and customers expect. I mean, if you're not going to change anything, building a DevOps team isn't going to produce new results. And doing the same thing over and over again is one definition of insanity. I mean, doing it over and over again expecting better results. So I suggest a set of underpinning configuration management practices are needed here. This is what we're talking about to fill this gap. Version control is a requisite here. You need to make sure that you have the right software going to the right libraries only when it's approved. Right? So you'll need a set of managed repository libraries for control documentation and software. Formal baselines should be undertaken. So financial management, IT service management practices. Formal baselines, remember the V model. There are different traditional configuration management baselines that should be taken. For example, the first one would be a functional baseline, which is taken after the requirements are defined. And there's an allocated baseline, which really covers how this is going to be divvied up from a working perspective. Who's going to do what? Who establishes the scope and authority and interfaces at each coordinated activity? There's a design baseline. There's development baselines that go on during development and testing. And eventually you get a product baseline, which is when the product is released for use. Ongoing, once it's released for its initial use, there's the as-built, as-approved baseline, which is what it's supposed to be. There's an as-discovered baseline, which is what it actually is, and an as-planned baseline, which comes from change management and the forward schedule of change. Underpinning all this is a release authority. Now, it is configuration management's responsibility to account for, manage, and protect the integrity of service assets and configuration items through the service lifecycle by ensuring that only authorized components are used and only authorized changes are made. Okay? Software configuration management is key to this. Software configuration management is considered by many to be a separate discipline, and it's just as complex as configuration management because software is complex in its various forms and how it has to be managed. So release authority is nothing more than configuration management, making sure that all of the configurations are clearly recorded, and the products have been tested to make sure they align to the configuration that's expected before they're released for use. Again, these service configuration, these unclear application and IT service configurations are costing the organization money in both real dollars and lost opportunity dollars. So, but nobody's going to do anything about this until we bring it to the forefront, we expose it, and make a business case around it. So consider these 3 steps to do just that. First of all, you have to gauge the depth and breadth of this breakdown in your organization. That's absolutely critical to building a business case. So if you go to your CMDB and you look at your configuration items, how many of those CIs actually have clear configurations documented? Now remember, documentation doesn't necessarily have to exist in the CMDB. It could be anywhere. Institutions, or companies typically have, they have a spreadsheet or a small database or some data store where SharePoint where they've been keeping some of this information. How many of your CIs have such documentation? Take a sample of the recent major projects, changes going through your change management system, and look at how often are your configurations changing. 50% of the time? Does it, 100% of the time? What's the rate of change? How often are you changing customer expectations or functional, technical configurations to a product, an application you're delivering? Take a survey, a sample within IT and key business partners to determine how much people feel, how much corrective action is actually taking place. Last thing you want to do is go before your management with a business case and misstate what the culture is thinking. So make sure that you have a good understanding that most people say, oh yes, it is 40% or it's 60%. You're going to get some feel for just how bad the situation is. You need to make sure that your message when you present this to management is worded appropriately. You overstate it, and your management's not going to be too perceptive to the remediation that you're proposing. So the second step, after you have built a business case and you understand your current environment, a large percentage of your CIs don't have the right information documented. The documentation isn't controlled. It's all over the place. It's not accurate. And corrective action is pervasive as a result. You need to plan your steps. Where are you? Where are your next steps? So we have a configuration management capability framework, and the picture here on the slide is a very stripped down version of this. But most organizations are at this initial capability where they have a basic plan, tools in place, a team. It's integrated to incident, problem, change. It's some basics going on. And then invariably, once you get to that, there is the organic growth period where other people want additional classes and relationships, and things start to grow, and people start to tweak the CMDB, adding things to it. Without an overarching plan for this can be problematic, and I see a lot of organizations that struggle with this. It wasn't taken in as a cohesive whole. It was done organically is probably the best term. Going beyond that is where we're talking about addressing this breakdown today. You need to manage software as a configuration item, version controls, start to put in place mechanisms where you can ensure that the right software is promoted into the right libraries. Then you can establish your release authority, definitive media libraries, and really address this issue. The third step here, you've built a business case, you've built a plan, it's now to start executing and taking actions to get there. Keep in mind that building out version control, managing software as a CI, is probably a multi-year effort. It takes probably at least a couple of budget cycles to get the funding and the time to implement version control for your critical apps and your larger pieces of larger applications and code bases. You need to take action. So let me recap here. The first item presented was that the configuration of your products, i.e. your services and applications, should capture the control objectives and requirements of your business and customers. The accuracy of these configurations is paramount and is needed for decision support. Without the underpinning configuration management practices, industry statistics based on 3 decades of research indicate 40% of your resources are focused on corrective actions. This is a tremendous cost in terms of real dollars. We have presented examples of how soft dollars and lost opportunity costs, the organizational cost of untrusted data, baking in the current process and issues into all your future efforts has, again, tremendous cost. Finally, we presented 3 steps you can take to start maturing your configuration management practices. Build a business case, plan it, take action. So thank you for your attention. If you wish to discuss this further, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I look forward to discussing this further and helping understand your organization and how we might support your initiatives. That will conclude my presentation today. We'd now like to address some questions.
Yeah, fantastic, Drew. Thanks for the excellent presentation. All right, we'll move right into the questions section. The questions box is still open for everybody here, so feel free to ask a question while we go through here. The first question we have here, Drew, is how deep should we go in the configuration management database to document our products?
The rule of thumb in traditional configuration management is to the lowest level of independent change. So if you think about that, I don't deal with, if you think about a server, do you really need to tear it down and to say, oh, there's a network interface cards and there's memory and there's hard drives? Probably not. You probably need to manage it at the server level. And maybe you might, some organizations break hardware and software, the server hardware into one CI class and the operating system into another CI class. You have to, this is really the art of configuration management. But I would tell you that the rule of thumb I use in defining is making sure that if there's something I want people to see a relationship between, i.e. my 2 CIs, and the relationships in my CMDB, then that's when I want to split it into a separate CI. I want people to visually trip over it when they're looking at the CMDB. That's when I'll break it into 2 separate CIs. But typically, everything that's in the data center that's under change management is a CI. Now, how you break that down would vary.
Okay. And Drew, we have another question that came in here, and is what is the main challenge to implement CMS?
Organizational change is probably the biggest challenge. This takes effort, it takes planning, it takes central coordination. It is a discipline, which takes management with some intestinal fortitude to make sure that it happens. But it also takes a feedback loop to make sure that what you're doing is being effective and adding value, and not doing things for the sake of just doing things. A lot of organizations tend to go one way or the other. Either they want too much information or not enough information. Most organizations tend to first start off with too much information, and that leads to issues. So the main challenge is organizational and making sure that you scope this correctly.
Okay. It looks like we've had another question come in here. Do you need an organizational change product before in order to implement CMS? I'm sorry. Do you need an organizational change project before implementing CMS?
No, you don't. Not a separate project. It can be done with the as part of the project. It's part of your initial socialization of what you're doing with the project, and as you onboard teams and you start managing and communicating expectations around the organization, you can start managing it there. To me, this is also very important to start communicating at the very beginning that there are organizational changes coming. People are going to be expected to do things to maintain the CMDB that they're not asked to do today. It's not all done by discovery. They have a responsibility for managing the data, or they are responsible for their data, whereas before they may or may not have had that responsibility. So it's part of the project. It's part of setting expectations. I wouldn't have a separate project for it now.
Okay, and we have time today for one last question, and it is, what are the prerequisites to implement the CMS?
Prerequisites. You probably need a good understanding of your asset management process to make sure that physical, hardware, and software assets are known and have some semblance of management. Controls on it, basically how it gets into the data center and who gets it there. Change management is a requisite. You basically have to go back into change management and add steps to make sure that the CMDB is maintained, and is maintained proactively as part of the change. And I think another prerequisite is making sure that you have an understanding of the resource requirements to do configuration management. Again, most organizations just look at it from the use case of a CMDB manager, who one person or two people try to add data and new CIs, new relationships, and new reports and the like to the CMDB, without thinking in terms of this is a strategic service which enables your IT organization and your business to operate more effectively. So this is back to that release authority concept. This is a configuration management function that needs to be resourced.
All right, fantastic. Well, that'll be all for today, everyone. I want to thank you for joining again. We at Quint hope that you found this session both educational and informative. Please check out our website, www.quintgroup.com, to learn more and get access to some of our great white papers, blog posts, and other thought-provoking pieces, as well as our future webinars as well on ITSM, more, and configuration management. If you have any additional inquiries, please feel free to reach out to us directly and even ask for Drew, and we'd be happy to discuss configuration management, ITSM, or really any subject at all. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Thanks again for joining.